Good evening. Good evening, everybody. Ready to see you all this evening? Welcome. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is the Veterans Breakfast Club, Greatest Generation Live for Thursday, January 23rd. My name is Sean Hall. I'm the Director of Programming with the VBC. It's great to see you all. We are a nonprofit in Western PA, and our mission is to create communities of listening around veterans and their stories to connect, educate, heal, and inspire. We've been doing this for our 16th year, and we've been chugging all the way on these Thursday night programs for over a year now with our host, Glenn Flickinger. Glenn, how are you doing this evening?
Doing excellent, Sean. Looking forward to a great program. We have an excellent guest who's photographed and written an excellent book, and we're looking forward to talking to him.
Absolutely. We'll get to that in just a second. I welcome you all to check us out. If you're new to us, I'll be chiming back in a little bit later with a little station break. But check out our website, www.veteransbreakfastclub.org, to find out everything there is to know about us, our history, our past videos, our upcoming programming. See if there's anything that catches your eye. Sign up to get on our e-blasts. That way you can get our schedule in your email and you know what's coming up. And also, we welcome you to become a donor. If you'd like the program tonight, please let us know. We would greatly appreciate it. I'll hand it off to Glenn.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Sean. It's nice to be back for another Thursday night program. Before we get started and introduce our guest tonight, we have to give a shout out to Ed Cottrell. Ed, I don't see you on my screen, but I understand you're here with us. Give us a shout out, Ed.
I see him waving.
Yeah, I see him waving. I asked him to unmute.
I'm here. I'm waving.
There you are. There you are.
Yeah.
How's it feel to be 103 now, Ed?
It feels tremendous.
Can you still go out and shoot your age on the golf?
It's amazing what happens each day with phone calls and letters and meeting people, and it's so invigorating to just be able to talk to people. I'm a happy camper, believe me.
We're happy to have you on, Ed, as we always are.
I look forward to these Mondays and Thursday nights because it enables me to look at a lot of other veterans that are involved in this program and to talk to other veterans that have gone through the defending our country. And anytime that I can meet anybody, I would be happy to chat with them.
So, Ed, the key question, because for those of you who don't know, Ed was also a very accomplished golf instructor in his life. A lot of professional golfers and so forth. And Ed, I understand most people like you can go out and shoot your age on your birthday. Is that right?
Well, at 103, it's not hard to shoot your age. I've shot my age over 150 times, so almost every time, I guess every time I play, but I don't play 18 holes anymore, so I can't count it as shooting my age.
We'll give you a break.
I'm usually maybe, even now, I play a little par 3 golf course, anywhere from 70 to 130 yards each hole. And I'm usually hitting each green, but I'm not that great of a putter anymore. So I'm usually 3 or 4 over par by the time I play 9 holes.
Well, if I played 9 holes, I might shoot my age. It'd be close if I could just play 9 holes. So, well, listen.
Look at the fun you're having.
Yes. Okay.
That's what golf does to you. You know, it's an ego straightener out. It affects your ego very quickly, but it's a sport that it just makes you competitive, but yet it humbles you.
That's the word, humble. Very. Well, thank you, Ed.
Okay. Say hello to all my friends that are watching.
We'll
I
let you say
really,
hello as the program goes on, Ed.
okay, thank you.
So, for anybody new, my name is Glenn Flickinger, and I host this almost every Thursday night program called Greatest Generation Live, all things World War II, authors, veterans, as many as we can still find, experts on various aspects of World War II. This year, we're focusing on the 80th anniversary of a lot of very special events that happened in 1945. The next 80th anniversary show we have coming up will be February 13th on the Yalta Conference. So it'll be pretty interesting. But tonight we have as our guest Richard Sherman. Richard, please give a wave of your hand, please. Good to see you. You're unmuted, Richard.
I am, sir. Yes, I am.
Great, great. I don't even remember how we came to know each other, Rich, but I'm glad we did. Rich has photographed and written this beautiful book, Never Home, which we're going to explore tonight. Lots of stickies I have in my copy of it that Rich so kindly sent. But before we get to the book, Rich, tell us a little bit about you, because I know you're a Navy veteran.
Yes, sir, I am. And Glenn, thanks to you and the team and all your guests for having me on. I appreciate it. Yeah, so I'm a Navy veteran. I'm originally from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, grew up in the Philadelphia area, and today live in Southwest Florida. So a lot of things have changed over the years, but I started out as a kid from Philadelphia, went to Lehigh University, and my senior year decided to enlist in the Navy, and I got a slot at Officer Candidate School. Came from a Navy family. My dad was a Korean War veteran. My godfather was a Vietnam veteran. My dad's brother was a World War II veteran. I was very close to him. So we had lots of Navy folks in the family. My senior year, I decided this is something that I really wanted to pursue. I was fortunate enough to be commissioned. I was commissioned by my father-in-law, who was a captain at the time and turned out to be a Navy two-star admiral at the end of his career. And did 4 years of active duty and 3 years of reserve in the intelligence field, and moved on and went to graduate school, worked in the financial services business, and I've been a professional photographer now for about 14 years, I guess it is, coming up on 14 years now.
Wow, that's quite a career. And thank you for being a veteran. Thank you for serving. So let me bring up this PowerPoint so we begin showing you some of the slides that Rich and I have prepared for tonight. And Sean, let me know if our other guests checks in at any time if you could, okay? Okay.
Will do. I'm wondering if you might have got the time wrong, but we will see.
Yeah, that Eastern time thing is always a tricky thing if you're not used to it. I'm not sure where he lives, as a matter of fact.
I don't either, but we'll dive.
Let me tell the audience, we were hoping that a retired General William Matz, would be on tonight. He's someone that has written a book about his career, which is pretty fascinating. And Sean is going to be interviewing him on a Monday night, February 17th, if I have that right.
That's correct.
There's the book, My Toughest Battle, A Soldier's Lifelong Struggle with Polio, which, wow, I find that pretty intriguing. But the reason we thought it would be interesting to have him on tonight, one of his positions was Secretary of the American Battle Monuments Commission. So all the American cemeteries overseas. And he ran that for, I guess, a couple of 3 years at some point in the 2010s. And obviously, he'd be interesting to have on the program for some commentary and understand what he did. So we'll see if he joins us. So, Rich, Never Home, Remembering the Military Heroes Who Never Returned. What gave you this idea? Tell us about how you went about researching and photographing for this book.
Sure. Well, I'd start off by connecting with General Matz and the American Battle Monuments Commission. The ABMC manages and maintains all of our overseas military cemeteries. 23 pertain to World War I and World War II, and that's the project that we'll talk about today. I went and photographed all 23 of the overseas World War I and World War II cemeteries, and included some 54 biographies of individuals who have never made it home from the war. The ABMC also manages 3 additional cemeteries that don't pertain to World War I or World War II, 31 memorials in 17 countries, an extraordinary organization. They keep magnificent care of our final resting place of our fallen heroes overseas, and they were extremely accommodative of this project. So a big thank you to General Matz as well as the entire organization at the ABMC before and today for what they do for our fallen heroes. The idea of the project, I think as veterans, we think of those who have gone before us at our very first days when we learn in boot camp about the experience of those who were sacrificed so much or were great heroes or show great valor. So the lives of those who have fallen have never really been far from my mind. And so I had this experience as a veteran. We think about those who are in harm's way today, as well as those who have gone before us. And I think it's a wonderful thing about us and about our organizations that we stay so close and connected across the centuries. But I guess I would say that the project really had its basis around 2007. I was working in a financial services job, and I went up to Vancouver. And this was, of course, at the time of Gulf War II. I was a Gulf War I Navy intelligence officer, and I'm out of active service for a couple of years at this time and went up to, excuse me, reserve service at the time, and I went up to Vancouver, and I got into the cab, and I started to have a conversation with the cab driver. And it turned out that the cab driver was a World War II Ukrainian Army veteran. And wow, what an experience for me. The next 20 to 25 minutes, we talked about that experience, and he shared some things that were transformative in my life. My life, like you say, really changed with that conversation. We always think about the experiences of those who served in World War II or Korea, those who've gone before us. Ed, it is a privilege to be on the same call with you. Thank you for your service. So, I was chatting with him, and it became very real what the experience was. It wasn't a distant war. It became very, very real. And that conversation took me to the experience of a young Ukrainian soldier here he is, he's in his 80s at the time. It's a very personal experience for him, even to that day, that experience of fighting in World War II. In front of him was, of course, the German war machine, a formidable enemy. We know all about that. Behind him was the Russian Red Army, a horrible ally for the Ukrainians, as we've learned about the cultural differences between those two peoples, being beaten and shoved and maltreated by the officers in charge. And so here he explained to me some of the experience he had in war. And then all of a sudden, it must have proved to be miraculous for him. These American GIs started to show up in his country. Strong, fit, young men came, and there was hope again. And next thing they knew, they're fighting in their own country. They're just struggling for survival. And this force of young men came to help them. And it was inconceivable to him, even in his 80s, why the Americans would leave the comfort of their home, the safety of their home, an ocean away, a continent away to help him. Again, it's a different experience when you're a young teenager, and at that time, the perspective is very personal. We have the advantage of looking back on it and having the global perspective, but for him, it was a very, very personal experience that he now had hope, and he had allies, and he had people around him, and they had a chance. So it was a remarkable conversation, and against the backdrop of war and death and struggle for survival and horrific weather, he explained that the American troops had provisions every day. And here he would go 4 to 5 days with having nothing to eat. He was in his own country, fighting on his own land. And the Russians would give them a bowl of porridge, a bowl of soup, or something to eat every 4 to 5 days. And the Americans, these young, strong men with short haircuts and clean shaving faces, had food to eat every day. And it was inconceivable to him. And beyond.
Oops, Rich,
He frees up.
you're frozen.
All right. It's all right. We will catch back up with him in just a sec. Rich, he'll probably notice that his internet got a
For
hiccup.
survival.
Oh, yeah. Rich, you just caught back up with us. You froze there for a half a minute,
A half a minute. Sean,
maybe 15 seconds, roughly.
Sean, could you tell me where I stopped?
Well, you were relating the story of the Ukrainian soldier you met, and you're just about finished with that story.
Okay. And there's a note here that General Matz is trying to get in on the chat that I see here. Someone texted that. All right.
Yes.
So against this backdrop of war, Americans share their food with them. What an intimate and humanist touch of compassion that was in the backdrop of war. And that got me thinking in 2007, how do you thank someone that you'll never meet? And so I would go to bed at night. I tell the story over and over again. And fast forward to 2017, I started to work. I'm now a professional photographer. I've studied photography. I've worked with some mentors. I've gotten better at the craft. And I started working with a consultant named Mary Virginia Swanson, someone who's well known in our business as a photographer. She's a consultant on photography books. She made her name in addition to the great work she does today. She started her career early on working for a gentleman that most people would know named Ansel Adams. And so she is an incredible resource for me and has been extremely supportive. And I said, how do we do this? And we started to flesh this thing out. And fast forward, now it's 2017. We're talking about 2018 with the help of the ABMC. I start going overseas to photograph these cemeteries, a journey of gratitude, a journey of 6 years, a journey that takes me to 3 continents and 8 trips. And as a photographer, I thought, not only do I go to thank somebody and stand in front of their headstone and reflect on them, I'm a prayerful person to pray in front of them and to think about their lives and to thank them. But I also brought my camera gear along with me so that others could join me on this journey of gratitude.
Wow, 8 trips. We're going to get into where these battlefields are located here in just a second. But when Richard and I first started talking, I told him about the program we did with this author now 2+ years ago. And some of our audience might remember him, Bill Beagle, I think is the way he pronounces it. And buried on the battlefield, Not My Boy, Return of the Dead from World War II. And it's almost like an interesting companion book to Rich's book, because if you remember, this was the story, and a lot of this was, I was vaguely aware of it, but a lot of this was brand new information to me, that for both World War I and World War II, all of the loved ones, all of the relatives of the deceased soldiers and airmen and Marines, of course, were given the opportunity to bring the remains back to the United States. And that's what his book was about. And as I recall, I think about 60% of the relatives decided to bring the remains back. And this was the story as to how that went about, what they called the ghost ships that were carried these remains back from Europe and the Pacific and various points back to the United States. Occurred mostly, I think, in 47, 48, perhaps a little bit longer than that. And it was just somber discussion, difficult discussion, but fascinating at the same time. This is now the sort of other side of the story. This is the story of the 40% whose relatives decided to leave them in the cemeteries near where they had fallen in Europe or the Pacific. So if anybody hasn't read this book, I recommend it as well as Richard's, obviously.
Yeah, and yeah, I thank you for sharing that with me as well, Glenn, because I learned a lot from that book as well. Many of those, were families decided to leave them with their mates where they fell. In other instances, the family could not be reached. A number of the folks who I feature in my book lost parents while they were away on war, and they were unmarried, and so there wasn't a direct next of kin to make that decision. And sadly, some of the individuals, not many, but are in graves where the remains can't be disassociated, can't be separated and brought home distinctly or individually. So yeah, if there are a mix of reasons why those some 207,000 still remain overseas from the 2 world wars.
Right, right.
And I thought you want to take a minute, Glenn, just to welcome Major General Bill Matz, who's in the room. I'll ask General to unmute.
Hello, General. Are you there? Can you speak to us? Can you hear us?
See if we can. See here. I lost his screen. We'll get you, General. There we go.
Yeah, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yeah. No, so I've been listening to you all for the last 4 or 5 minutes. Very interesting. Delighted to join you.
Well, welcome. We're very pleased and honored to have you on the show, General. Perhaps before you were able to link in, we told them about your book and your upcoming appearance with Sean on February 17th about your book and about your service. So
yes, right.
Looking forward to that.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Fascinating title to the book.
Yeah.
I'm really intrigued how you become a general struggling with polio at the same time. So we'll hold that story till February 17th.
Yeah, no, exactly. But just real quickly, the book is an autobiography, really. It's from the moment I left the womb till today. And I thought about writing it for quite some time. I have 7 grandsons. Over the years, they would ask Grandpa what I did, And so my post-polio doctor was very convincing when I saw him in 2014 for a major checkup after I was out of the service. He thought I had a story to tell there. It's primarily a story, I would say, about overcoming adversity as a young boy and then doing the things I was able to do. So, hopefully so folks will get out there and they'll read it. And everybody's got an issue or a problem out there. But if they could read something like this, it might give them a little hope and a little more grit to get through the tough things in life.
I'm looking forward to it. I can't wait for our conversation.
Yeah, well, thank you.
And then the other, the point for tonight that Colin Heaton made us aware of, and the reason we thought you'd like to join us tonight is that one of your assignments, I take it post-retirement, was the Secretary of the American Battle Monuments Commission.
Yes.
In 16, 17 sort of time frame?
Right. Yeah, so I was sitting comfortably at home after like my 3rd or 4th retirement. This was around Thanksgiving 2016, and the phone rang. And it was Mike Beese and Keith Kellogg, names you might recognize. They were on the Trump transition team. And they said, "Hey, Bill, how would you like to work for the Trump administration?" And before I could answer, the phone was on speaker. Before I could answer, my wife said, "Of course he would." She wanted me out of her space. So no. But anyway, that's really how it happened. And I said, "Yeah, I would. It would depend on the job." And so we went through things in the Defense Department, things in the VA. I wasn't real hep about going over there, but the American Battle Monuments Commission job came up, and I had heard a little bit about that when I was on active duty. And I'm a Pacific file, not a European file, so I was never really in Germany, never stationed in Germany with 33 years in the infantry. So I jumped on it, and Trump didn't know me from Adam, and I didn't know him, but I was told when they put the 3 final names before him, he selected me. I think Keith pushed my name, but he selected me, and I'm told what he said is, "I want that guy because he's an infantryman." I thought that was interesting. Yeah, so I enjoyed it. I was sworn in on the 1st of January, 2018, and stayed until 20 March of 2021. Actually, I submitted my letter like we all have to on the 20th inauguration day, when a new administration, but they let me stay a couple more months because we were finalizing bringing into the portfolio 2 more monuments, which we might talk about tonight. But it was a wonderful job. It was, you know how you get jobs and you just know you're a perfect fit for the job.
Yeah.
And when you think and within your own heart that you're a perfect fit, you're going to be able to do a really good job. So I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I was delighted to see who's the gentleman tonight, Mr. Sherman, who's
Rich Sherman.
yeah, Rich Sherman for doing what he's doing, and very, very interesting. So that's just I don't want to take all the time here, but that's just my introduction and how I got into it.
Well, no, we're very pleased to have you on, and we're going to go through this presentation that Rich and I have cooked up about his book and these cemeteries, and a lot of stories about the people that are interned in those cemeteries. So we'll go through that, and please jump in just with the rest of our audience and ask questions, make comments. We'll
Thank you.
stop a couple times for that.
Yeah, thank you.
Let me put this back up on the screen. Okay, we good? So these are just maps. I think I have 4 of them that Rich shared with me of the various locations of the cemeteries in all over the world. Rich, you visited every single one of these.
Yes, sir. The 23 World War I and World War II. There are 8 that pertain to World War I, and there are the balance, 16 essentially, 15, I guess I should say, is relates to World War II, with the exception of Suresnes outside of Paris is a hybrid of World War I and World War II. So I guess 8 and 14, and then there's one that's a World War I and World War II cemetery named Suresnes, right outside of Paris.
So the first question I have, and maybe the general could comment on this, how did we decide where to put these cemeteries? Obviously, the Normandy Cemetery, which I visited that one. I visited the one in Cambridge, England as well. Location very close to the battlefield. Is all this determined by, sort of location of where the remains of these men took place?
Yeah, they are. Beginning with World War I, of course, a lot of the soldiers were temporarily buried. And when the Graves registration folks went over there, primarily the Army quartermaster units that recovered these remains, they brought them to major collection points.
Yeah.
And of course, most of them were in and around the major battlefields, like the Meuse-Argonne, largest campaign battle the United States Army ever fought. Cemetery right there, Wazane, and of course Normandy. So to answer your question, the cemeteries mostly rose around where the actual battles took place.
Yeah. I tried to visit the Anzio battlefield about 3 years ago when we were in Italy, and it was a Sunday, and the Italian trains were on strike. So
Okay.
I can't tell you how upset I was.
Yeah.
Rich,
well, we have 2 cemeteries. Well, yeah, you've got them on there. This is a great map. Yeah, we've got the Florence American, and then south the Sicily Rome American Cemetery.
Rich, what did I miss in Anzio?
Good food. But of course, as the general pointed out, you have 2 of them in Italy. They're both from World War II. A remarkable story of, the Italians are out of the campaign after Tunisia, and the Nazis are chased back across Sicily into mainland Italy, and Anzio, where the American forces struggled for about 6 months to get off the beach, trapped on the beach for about 6 months. The extraordinary thing about it is Rome, about an hour's car drive today, just to the north, was liberated on 4 June 1944, the 4th of June 1944, 48 hours before the offensive Operation Overlord over in Normandy and in France. It tells you, I think it's a great reminder about the scope of this war that was going on, that Rome could be liberated, which is, of course, a considerable effort. And meanwhile, fresh troops are waiting in England to cross the Channel 48 hours later. It really underscores the scope of World War II and the amount of troops and amount of firepower and amount of material needed at that time.
So I was surprised to learn via the map that there's only one Pacific American cemetery, I guess just outside or in Manila. Uh, how did that? Why only one, given the number of casualties? I guess the geography of it all just didn't lend itself to. You didn't want cemeteries on Guadalcanal, Iwo Jima, Saipan, Tinian, so they concentrated it all in Manila.
Well, I think the general can talk to that some more as well if he'd like. But of course, Manila is one of those sad, well, they're all sad cemeteries, but here on the walls of the missing are over twice as many as the numbers interred. There are over
Yeah.
36,000 listed on the walls of the missing versus some 17,000 plus that are interred due to the
Yeah.
nature of the conflict, right? From Guadalcanal and Guam and Iwo Jima. The 800 or so from Indianapolis are on the walls of the missing in Manila. And of course, the Philippines is a close ally to the United States, and it's Normandy technically has more acreage, but no other cemetery has more memorialized. And it just has a very, very large feeling to it when you get there because there's so many plots at Manila. But I suspect, and maybe the general can provide more historical context, it has to do with the strong relationship between the U.S. and the Philippines for many, many decades. And, these cemeteries are leased in perpetuity. Um, at no charge by foreign governments, and that decision has to be made by the foreign governments to lease these lands to us. And the Philippines allows us to maintain Manila right in town, very expensive piece of real estate at no charge even today.
Yeah, no, that's good. Let me jump in there a minute. First of all, folks, we have two cemeteries in the Philippines. Manila American Cemetery is the largest of all 26 of our cemeteries. And the speaker's right. We've got about 17,000 interred there and almost 30,000 on the walls of the missing. The other cemetery is north of Manila, and it's the old Clark Air Base Cemetery. You may remember the eruption of Mount Pinatubo back in 1992.
Yes.
Well, when that happened, the Pinatubo ash just about destroyed the American Clark Air Force Base. So the Air Force gave it up and left, turned everything over to the Filipinos. But what remained was a cemetery. And of course, the cemetery had thousands of people buried there. Now, they weren't all soldiers or airmen or military people, but they were all Americans. Family members who'd lived over there in the Philippines for years. So that was given to ABMC, and we had to clean it up. Of course, this was long before I took over, but we cleaned it up and had to get all the ash off of each headstone. It was quite an operation. But that's a beautiful cemetery now. As I say, that's north of Manila. So there are two cemeteries in Manila, in the Philippines.
Yes, sir. And the Clark Cemetery, as the general alluded to, is a beautiful cemetery. And it's if you walk outside of the Clark Cemetery, the 100-kilometer marker for the Bataan Death March is located right outside of that cemetery. Now, it's named the Clark Veterans Cemetery or Clark Veterans American Cemetery. So it's not specifically related to World War I or World War II, but that's correct. It's a large cemetery, well maintained, of course, by the ABMC, and the Bataan Death March. Actually, the markers are right outside. You walk out the gate, and there it is.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The official name is Clark Veterans Cemetery, and it's in a little town called Pampanga.
Then, of course, there's a large number of World War II veterans buried in Hawaii, on Oahu, at the what's the bowl?
At the Punch Bowl.
Punch Bowl.
Punch Bowl. I went there when I was there. I looked up and I have a picture of Ernie Pyle's grave marker. I was just a big fan of Ernie Pyle's, and I had to find it. So
now, that's the Punch Bowl, the American Cemetery on Oahu. That is not an ABMC managed cemetery.
I kind of figured that out. Yeah.
Yeah, that is a Department of the Veterans Affairs managed cemetery. And I'm sure many of you have been over there and seen it. But when you enter that cemetery, looming ahead of you is that big, beautiful memorial. That is an ABMC battle monument. So we control, run, and budget for the battle monument. That was my responsibility, but the cemetery itself is Department of Veterans Affairs. Had I stayed on, had Trump won that election and we stayed on another 4 years, I was working to get that cemetery. That should be managed by the American Battle Monuments Commission. And I was working very, very hard to get that with the Secretary of the VA at the time, but administrations changed, and that sort of fell by the wayside.
So we're going to go into some of the pictures of the cemeteries and the ceremonies that Rich has in his book. Some of these Rich suggested, some of them I liked so much, I just suggested. And this was one that I really liked, Rich. What are we looking at here?
So this is the World War I cemetery in Marne in France, some 50 or 70 miles northeast of Paris. It is the cemetery that kind of marks the coming of age of the United States Marine Corps. You know, going into World War I, there was under 10,500 total force strength of the United States Marine Corps at the time. Of course, that organization has expanded and is one of the great prides of our country today. En Marne was a battle where the Marines had great success in this area. If you look behind the chapel there, you see Belleau Wood. Those are the trees that remain from a very dense forest and a protected area in World War I that was fortified by the Germans. It is for your viewers and listeners, probably a very familiar story where Captain Lloyd Williams of the Marine Corps was moving forward and encountered a French colonel retreating who jotted a note down, uncertain of his ability to speak English, with help, jotted a note down telling the Marine captain to retreat. And at that stage, Williams said, "Retreat, hell, we just got here." Of course, that's very famous, lives in the lore of the United States Marine Corps. The sad truth is that Captain Williams died 9 days later from a gas attack and mortar attack. But Belleau Wood and En Marne is a wonderful final resting place for many from World War I. And to me, I look at it as really the monument to the birth of the American United States Marine Corps.
Interesting. Yeah. We have quite a few Marines on in our membership, and I'm sure eventually we'll get some comments from them about this.
Well, they're so shy, Glenn. We might have to coax it out of them.
Yeah, let me jump in. There's about 2,300 Marines and soldiers buried there, and right up in that wooded area, is the beginning of Belleau Wood. And there is one of our battle monuments is the Marine Corps monument up there. I don't know if you saw that. But...
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah. I covered the cemetery in the book, but at the beginning we had mentioned the book covers the 23 World War I and World War II cemeteries, and the ABMC manages 26, including 31 monuments on 17 different countries. And as you indicated, just a short distance from there is the monument to the Marine Corps in Belleau Wood.
Exactly. Yeah, we have there's 26 cemeteries in 17 countries on 5 continents, and there's 31 battle monuments. Wow. I got to each of the cemeteries. I got to every cemetery while I was the ABMC secretary, and some on multiple occasions. And I got to about 26 of the 31 battle monuments.
And General, I mentioned my sincere gratitude to the ABMC under your leadership at the time when I started the project, and throughout the length of the project, an extraordinary organization, and all the help that they've given to me and others in helping to keep the memory of these fallen alive and keeping their resting place, perfectly maintained for them as a great place of honor.
Yeah. When you started your project, was I secretary then?
I started in 2018, so yes, sir.
Oh yeah, you were. Did you ever come into our headquarters?
No, sir.
I
didn't quite have the capital to make too many more trips. You know, a divorce lawyer is very expensive these days, sir.
Yeah. Okay.
But your team was outstanding to work with, and I can't see how putting the punch bowl under the ABMC would be a bad decision, sir.
Yeah.
So, Rich, this is one of the more evocative photos I chose out of all the photos in your book. Tell us about where this is and what you were I can tell you, this is a lot better photo than I can take with my iPhone.
Well, thanks, Glenn. Glenn and I chat a little bit before our talk today, and this was kind of the image that had always been in my mind when I started the project. That you kind of envision things, and of course you adapt, and you have to make changes, and opportunities come to you, and other opportunities disappear. But it's always this idea of a solitary steps through what I ideally had envisioned snow. Now I made two trips traveling from the U.S. to Europe. Was a considerable amount of investment. Every mile, every meal, it costs a considerable amount of money to invest in it. But I had the idea of getting this in snow. Instead, I got some ice, and so this idea of footsteps, a single set of footsteps through the icy condition or the snowy condition, if it all worked out, was always in my mind. And I think it's just photography. I'm a professional photographer, and so and I teach photography, and I speak about photography as being a language. We write with light. That's what photography means. We are writing with light. And there's times when, as you can see me sort of struggling for descriptors, there are times when photography just says, here it is, and you describe it with your emotion rather than with the adjectives or the nouns or the verbs that you're trying to articulate. And so this image is shot very early in the morning, very cold, and I'll let you interpret it individually, each of you, the way you want to. But it was a shot that was always in my mind when I started this project.
And Rich's book is just full of these kind of photos. I mean, we don't have the time to go through all of them. Plus, we want you to buy Rich's book, so we're not going to show all of them.
Of course.
Yeah.
Rich, what cemetery was that?
Let me see here. I think that was let's see, that is Wazen, I believe. Yeah,
Wazen?
Yeah.
This next picture, Rich, I chose. Excuse me. I'm not sure it's in your book, but I found it in one of your collections online.
Yes, sir.
And I just love. I'm a World War II historian, but I go back to World War I a lot. I lecture a lot on World War I, and it's almost becoming a forgotten war in the United States. It's hard for people to know. Not people don't know too much. Tell us about this picture. Who are these soldiers in this picture?
Okay, so these are the ceremonial guard from the Big Red One, the First Division uh, of the United States Army. Obviously dressed for the ceremony in doughboy hats and in traditional World War I uniforms. As we went into World War I, the United States had the 17th largest standing army in the world behind Portugal, right? So the modernization of the American military under uh, uh, General Pershing, and Wilson, and the leadership at the time took place really in World War One. The Big Red One was assembled from various battalions that were fighting Pancho Villa and chasing him across Mexico, or had experience in the Spanish-American War. And so we really just had one division that was prepared for war. And Pershing was adamant about modernizing and preparing American troops. We had conscription. We brought these young men in, and one of the great things that I admire about Pershing, who, by the way, served as the first head of the American Battle Monuments Commission, starting in 1923. The wonderful organization, celebrated its 100th anniversary just 2 years ago. But Pershing was adamant about getting these young men trained, and obviously Haig and others were clamoring for American forces with this war of attrition going on for some 3.5 years. I reflect on Verdun and Somme, where some
Yeah.
600,000 casualties in those two battles alone from the French and the British, right? So there was a lot of desperation at the time and hope that the Americans could come and turn the tide of the war, which eventually the Americans did. But Pershing wanted to make sure his men were trained. The Big Red One was the best trained, the most prepared, and the first division to go. Some of the units fighting, some of the men fighting, which was strange at the time under foreign leadership, because Pershing was adamant about American troops being commanded by American officers. But the Big Red One today, obviously great pride in the Army, and this is a ceremonial group at the Saint Mihiel American Cemetery. Saint Mihiel was the big salient kind of akin to the bulge in World War II, but the reinforced salient that the French and German, excuse me, the French and the British had trouble for several years trying to push the Germans back, which with the help of the Americans, eventually happened in 1918, in the early summer of 1918, in just a few weeks' time, with American troops and American war material at the ready. And so this is a ceremonial guard at the May 2018 Memorial Day weekend ceremony at Sami Hill.
Okay.
Somehow was the first action by the U.S. Army, where it was the first U.S. Army that had been formed, that Pershing headed at the time. And, it really was kind of the birth of the modern U.S. Army there. And then I'm going to jump to this another picture here that I thought was also very evocative, incredibly well framed. Tell us a little bit about this picture, Rich. Which cemetery is it, and what were you trying to illustrate here?
Coincidentally, this is also at Sami Hill. And so here, during these ceremonies, sometimes you have a chance to go. I tried to plan many of my visits around Veterans Day and Memorial Day because of the ceremonies at the ABMC. They do an amazing job, wonderful speakers, wonderful ceremonies to remember the fallen. But there's also some wonderful times as well when there's no one around, when there's really that peaceful silence and there's respectful silence. But this was Sami Hill again. And one thing that amazed me was the continued commitment of our allies, particularly the French and British, to remember our American troops and the losses. And so here is a Frenchman with his drapeau, with his flag. It was striding through the cemetery at the end of the ceremony, and I lined up for this photograph. You can see the incredible work that the ABMC does. Meticulously maintain grounds, the flags that are placed for the ceremony. But I think it reflects the great respect. And Glenn, you said something at the beginning. Kind of World War I's kind of starting to become a bit, I don't know what the exact term you use, but it becomes a bit nebulous. It becomes a little bit over the horizon for many of particularly the younger generation today. And so one of the motivations in this book was to help keep the memories alive, and also to help every generation remember all of our fallen heroes that rest overseas. They all had families, they all had loved ones, they all had goals and aspirations. And so, and I was amazed at the tremendous turnout whenever we had a ceremony. And even in the Netherlands, for example, without ceremonies, the tremendous number of people that were just walking on a cold, I think it was 23 degrees the second time I went to the Netherlands, and there were a dozen or more Dutch folks walking around the cemetery on a weekday. So this highlights the great respect that our allies continue to show our fallen heroes from the wars.
Yeah, we have 4,200 buried there at Sami Hill, Rich.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So I took the PowerPoint down for a moment. We were about halfway through this, and I just thought we'd entertain any questions that the audience might have at this point, or anything in the chat, Sean, that's come up that would be interesting to address for Rich or the general.
Absolutely. Lively chat tonight, everyone. Thank you all. Colin asked, are there Americans at the Monte Cassino Cemetery? I know British and Poles, as well as Germans, are there, with some French, I believe.
I'm going to defer to the general on that one. My program took me to the American cemeteries. I did visit a British and a German cemetery during the trip, but I was pretty occupied getting the stories of our American fallen that are located in our cemeteries. I don't know the answer to that. General, do you know, sir?
Yeah, I don't know the answer either. This is the Monte Cassino Cemetery.
Correct.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure.
I would be surprised, but I don't know. That's the answer.
That's not an ABMC. It's not an American cemetery.
Right. No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dave Seaver had asked, isn't there a military cemetery on the island of Oahu in the Punch Bowl? Greg answered that yes, but I'm guessing that is not part of ABMC.
Right.
Ben Wright asked, he said he visited this U.S. cemetery in Manila, Philippines, while he was stationed at Clark Air Base in the mid-70s. There are also Filipino scouts buried there, as well as U.S. war dead. Are there Allied soldiers buried in other U.S. cemeteries?
So the answer is yes. There are certainly Filipino scouts and some foreign nationals in the Manila cemetery. A number of them, probably more in Manila than in the other cemeteries. I know there are some folks that served in different capacities, such as some Chinese aides that were killed that served generals or admirals are interred in some of our overseas cemeteries. So yes, there are some other foreign nationals that were in service to our nation. In my book is a gentleman named Kurt Gruber, who was part of the OSS. And he was, the OSS, of course, is the predecessor of CIA. He was dropped behind German lines and was killed almost immediately. But he was a German national, and he's commemorated in our cemeteries as well. So yes, there are foreign nationals that are in some way in support of the American military mission.
Thank you. And let's see here. I'm just making sure that everyone just go ahead and scroll through our chat, because there are several links here that everybody's saying check out, like the ABMC Facebook page, that there's a lot of information on there. Some book recommendations. Thank you for that, Gretchen. So different things here in the chat that you can check out.
Bob just asked about North Africa, and there are, as I mentioned in the beginning, there are 3 continents with our cemeteries, most of them, of course, being in Europe. But there's one in Manila, of course, that's Asia, that covers the entirety of the world. And then there's North Africa and Tunisia, a small cemetery, obviously from the start of the American offensive in the theater in Casablanca, and then moving to help the British in the famous, Desert Fox War with between Patton and Rommel in the desert. Yes, Tunisia is a small cemetery, but again, it's one of those cemeteries where there are more on the walls of the missing due to the nature of the combat. Those lost at sea, those planes that went down in the desert, than there are actually interred in North Africa, in Tunisia, a beautiful cemetery with great great landscaping. Yes, it's in Tunis, right along the Mediterranean. Yep.
Yeah.
Brad, you had a question, but it seemed to be answered.
Well, back to one of the earlier questions, are there other nationalities buried in our cemeteries? The Lafayette Escadrille Memorial Cemetery, there's a Frenchman and a Canadian buried there, along with our World War I aviators.
Right. So that's a good reminder, sir. The Lafayette Escadrille, this is digressing to a different point, but a lot of these cemeteries, many of your audience have been there, but some have not, and some of them are very, very accessible for those who are traveling overseas and go to Paris, or for example, Florence. The Florence American Cemetery is just a 20-minute cab drive, 20-minute cab ride from all the tourist attractions in Florence. The Lafayette Escadrille is 20 minutes, 25 minutes from the Arc de Triomphe in Paris, and it commemorates the World War I flyers that flew with the French in World War I, the American aviators that flew with the French in World War I. It is not it's a crypt, and that's of course in the book. It's a crypt, and the American aviators are buried underneath, along with, as the general mentioned, one from France and I believe one from Canada. I know definitely one from Canada. So, but that's very accessible, and it's a beautiful monument with a beautiful crypt with a wonderful fountain and a great park, just some 25 minutes from the Arc de Triomphe.
So I'd like to move on now to the second part of the presentation tonight, and the really other fascinating part of Rich's book. So Rich, you included 50-some bios of different people you chose at these cemeteries?
That's correct. I think there's 54 bios, although one of those bios are the 5 Sullivan brothers who were killed, and they're on the walls of the missing in Manila American Cemetery. But yes, so 54 pages of biographies, and 59 if you include the 5 Sullivan brothers.
So we're going to start with the one that I'm sure everybody knows about, but it's hard not to address this unique and giant-sized man. So we didn't want to skip him, but we're going to just talk about General George Patton for a bit, where he is, and his story, of course, which most people know. And then I'm going to jump pretty quickly, Rich, to the other names here, because the other names are names that I'm going to guess very few in our audience ever heard of.
Right.
If you did, I'd be surprised. So let's start with General George Patton.
Well, it's hard to cover General Patton in a short period of time, but the good news is most people know a lot about General Patton. He's interred at Luxembourg American Cemetery with the Third Army. Some of his greatest accomplishments, starting in the west of France in the days after D-Day, pushing through Brittany and then pushing further east and chasing the Nazis back into Germany. He is, of course, liberated the Band of Brothers, the 101st Airborne that protected Bastogne with the Battle of the Bulge, and of course the Bulge, the southern part of the Bulge, is in Luxembourg, and so he was an Olympian. We had two Olympians in the book, one in Tunisia, and General Patton competed in the Olympics in 1912 in the modern pentathlon. A lot has been written about Patton, good, bad, and indifferent, but he is laid to rest, and he is I think the only cemetery, maybe or only headstone, and maybe the general can correct me if I'm wrong, but that is set aside from the rest of the others. And I understand from my research with the ABMC that there were so many visitors coming to visit the grave of General Patton that it was having an effect on the footpaths and the ground around his cemetery. So they separated General Patton and they moved him to a place of honor right at the head of the cemetery, and he rests there. He survived the war. And unfortunately, in occupied Germany, had a automobile accident. Everybody was fine except for General Patton, who hit his head and broke his neck. And he died just a couple days before Christmas in 1945. We can leave the rest of history, but he is in Luxembourg with five of the 101st Airborne that are remembered there as well in Luxembourg, the men that he helped to liberate.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's exactly right, Rich. And I'll tell you, well, you can imagine this cemetery, our flagship cemetery was Normandy. But this cemetery and Normandy are the two most heavily visited. Clearly Normandy because of the D-Day invasion, and the Luxembourg Cemetery because of General Patton's grave. Everybody wants to come and see General Patton's grave.
Yeah. And if this is a little advertisement, if you don't mind, in late August and early September, the Veterans Breakfast Club is taking a 2-week trip to Europe, sort of following the Band of Brothers tour, and we will be stopping at the Luxembourg Cemetery. So
yeah.
jump on board.
Yeah, well, I may sign up for that because once you start going to these, it never really leaves you, right? Yeah, and I'm sure the general can reflect on that. You think about going back. When's my next trip? And I think that would be a fantastic trip, Glenn.
We'll be sending out the information on it in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah. Who's sponsoring that, Glenn?
We are the Veterans Breakfast Club. We've done
wonderful.
many trips to Todd is our executive director. He's done many trips to Vietnam. He's done a couple trips to Europe. Last September, Todd and I took a group of about 30 people with Ed Cottrell, our 100. Then he was just a youngster. He was only 102, P-50 47 fighter pilot with us. And we had a great time basically visiting the bomber bases at that time. But this would be mostly mainland Europe. So let's jump to the names, which I'm just fascinated by a lot of these stories because they are so unknown.
Right.
Rich, Henry.
Glenn, are we going to just set aside? Are we going to talk about each of the ones we had prepared to? And do you want me to just shorten up each comment, or are we going to skip a couple?
Well, I'd say we're going to try to get them all in.
Okay. So I'll be short and sweet then. Hank Boger, graduate of Ohio State University. I think they play some football there, as I remember. But Henry Boger was African American, a black professor. He graduated from Ohio State University, taught agriculture at or chemistry. He put on his draft card chemistry at the Tuskegee Institute, right? And went with the 92nd Division, one of the only all black division that saw combat operations in World War I, and was killed in active combat in the Ardennes Forest on November 11th, 1918. just a few short hours of the armistice of the 11th hour, the 11th day of the 11th month that ended World War I. Hank Boger was 31 years old, and just a short, I think it was like 10 days later, potentially, it's hard to verify, but potentially a broken heart may have killed her, but his mother passed away just 10 days later. And Hank Boger, a professor, Ohio State graduate, an accomplished man, fought with the 92nd in the Ardennes, was killed in World War I.
And if people haven't read about the 92nd Division in World War I, it's worth doing some research. There's some excellent books out there. I can't quote the names off the top of my head, but it's a stirring story. I think there was at least one Congressional Medal of Honor, one in the 92nd, and many other medals as well. They fought, and they fought for the most part with the French. It was the one division Pershing gave up to the French to let them have that division.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the 93rd was mostly in logistics and at the rear. Floyd Draper, I mentioned two Olympians, right? Patton being one of them. Floyd Draper won the Olympic gold medal in the 4x100 relay. Just at 5 feet 5 inches. He was the national champion at the University of Southern Carolina, University of Southern California at the 200-meter dash. He was an Olympian as well. Flew with the Army Air Forces. Here you see him at the 36 Olympics. You see him second from the left. The gentleman on the far left. I should say that Draper was part of this organization, part of this 4x100 team, and obviously the shortest, and he was second behind Jesse Owens in the 100-yard dash, and the gentleman on the far left, of course, is Jesse Owens, and so he was an Olympian, flew at 820B Havoc in Tunisia. We're back to Tunisia again in the Battle of Kasserine Pass. The Germans, the enemy, of course, makes these big pushes in World War I and World War II in different theaters before the American troops can really get a foothold here, and that's the Battle of Kasserine Pass in Africa. Unfortunately, his plane was shot down. I think it's a crew of 5. And he was killed, and he's interred at Tunisia at North Africa American Cemetery in 1943.
Just a bit about this plane. When I was reading about Roy Draper, and they came up with this B8, what is it, B-18 Havoc?
A20 Bravo, yeah.
I'm sorry, A20, yeah. I was like, what's that? I never heard of that. And so I looked it up, and yes, it was flown by the 47th Bomb Group in North Africa, 43. It was actually ordered by the French, built by the Americans, used by the French and the British called it the Boston, which now when I heard that name, I recalled what it was not used for very long. The B-26 soon after took over for probably a lot of good mechanical reasons. So yeah, Floyd Draper, what a life. That picture with him with Jesse Owens brings goosebumps to me. It just like, wow, that 1936 Berlin, right in front of Hitler.
Yeah.
What an event.
Yep. Helen Fairchild was from Pennsylvania and served as a nurse. A little stout, I think he's 5 feet 1 inches. You can't, as we know from the military, you can't really necessarily look at people and measure courage. It's their actions that show their courage. And served as a nurse and worked at the front, and was documented by 2 different individuals on at least one occasion in taking off her gas mask and giving it to an injured soldier. So, I'm trying to keep these nice and short, but she died at 33 years old, but served a lot with the British and the French, but went ahead with the American troops and was ultimately died from essentially chemical exposure. Her body failed after time of repeated exposure to gas, and she is as I mentioned, from Pennsylvania, and she's at the Solemn American Cemetery.
Wow. Tough
lady.
You don't have to rush too much, Rich.
Okay, I'll slow down.
Yeah.
This guy is a professional bad ASS, right? So this guy is Roderick Stephen Hall. Hall was a member of the OSS, the spy organization, the CIA, as it was being spun up at the time, a fledgling organization at the time. He enlisted in the Army in 41 and had spent some time at Yale, dropped out of school after Pearl Harbor, and I guess it was after Pearl Harbor that he ended up joining the Army, enlisted in the Army, eventually became an officer, signed up for the OSS, and he had this daring idea because he had spent a lot of years as came from a affluent family, went to Yale, spent a lot of time hiking and traveling around the world, and spent a lot of time in the Italian Alps before the war. And he was convinced that the Nazis could be pinched off if the Brenner Pass through the Alps, where the war material, all the logistics were coming in from Austria and the North were coming in to reinforce the Germans in Italy. If they could just pinch off that area, it would have a material and significant impact on their ability to continue combat operations. And so he wrote a letter to the OSS, and next thing you know, he received a letter ordering him to Washington, D.C. He did some training, parachute, learned how to build ordnance, explosives, learned how to jump out of an airplane, and volunteered to go to the Brenner Pass. They sent him in essentially there was a 5-man team. Each of them operated independently. In the course of a very short period of time, set up a 500-person partisan organization. It blew up at least 11 different bridges, much to the anger of the Nazis and difficulty of the Nazis to reinforce their troops. A lot of this is almost James Bond in its nature, conducted through the harsh winter of 44 and into early 45, up in at altitude, on snowshoes, on skis, suffered frostbite a number of times. In fact, frostbite is essentially what did him in. He was ordered to blow up a bridge, recovering from some frostbite on his feet, and he got on some skis. Heavy snowstorm came in, took refuge, found a partisan to protect him. The partisan sold him to the Nazis. He was tortured for 2 weeks, hung by a clothesline, and killed. This was toward the end of the war. His body was found. The records were found. He was in uniform when he was killed. The 4 individuals responsible from the SS, from the German side, were taken to military tribunal. One was given life in prison. The other 3 were summarily executed by the U.S. Army. But Hall, in just a number of months, wreaked havoc behind enemy lines, essentially dropped in without ammunition, dropped in with just his wits, found partisans, helped them blow up bridges, and really had a material impact on logistics for the Nazis in Italy for that winter of 44 and into early 45.
And where is he buried, Rich?
He is, let me see here.
Would this be Florence, I would think?
He is buried in Florence American Cemetery. Right. Yep, that's exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
What a story.
There's a book written on him as well, but extraordinary courage and tough as nails guy, for sure. He was 29 years old when he was killed.
Just bone chilling. We're going to pause for a moment. And Sean, would you like to do the station break?
Sure. Do that real quick here. I'm going to pop my screen on. We're just going to thank our sponsors for the program. First up is Tobacco-Free Adagio Health. They've been sponsoring us for quite some time. We'd like to thank them. They help people. They're dedicated to preventing and reducing tobacco use, educating people about tobacco hazards, and advocating for healthier places to live, work, and play. Check them out at tobaccofree.adagiohealth.org. And we'd also like to thank UPMC for Life. They can help you make sense of Medicare, get the answers and information you need, such as how to choose the Medicare Advantage plan that's right for you. UPMC for Life has plans designed for veterans by veterans that can save you money and get you more benefits. And you can view all of your plan options by going to upmchealthplan.com/Medicare. We have a survey that we like to put into the chat and the link. It takes about 2 minutes to complete, and we like knowing what everybody's thoughts are on the program this evening. So if you'd like to fill that out, we do watch these very closely. We also have a VBC magazine. The one on the left was one that came out a couple months ago. We have a new one coming out that is going to printer very shortly on the right. This is a free magazine again, so if you don't get it, it's just because we don't have your address. Please send that to us, and we will be sure to send you one. If you would like multiples and would like to hand them out in your community to get the word out about VBC, we'd appreciate it. But we could send you anywhere between 25, 100, 10, how many of you'd like. But look for that in your mailbox. And this is obviously the program that we are in right now. So come to us on Monday night, where we will be talking with a TARPS, Tactical Air Surveillance Pod System veteran from the Desert Storm, Desert Shield, Navy veteran, Chris Bacon. He was served on the USS Saratoga. So we'll be talking with him on Monday night.
And next Thursday night on Greatest Generation Live, we will have two guests who I see on tonight, Marilyn and Colin, two of our most favorite guests who've been on multiple times. And we're going to be talking about basically stories of humanity from the Germans, the Japanese, etc., during World War II. Something that Colin, Marilyn, and I cooked up a couple of months ago, and they graciously have put a lot of work into this, and I think it'll be an interesting program.
Yeah. Can I say something here, John?
Sure.
Yeah, so Colin and Marilyn are the two that helped me navigate through this book. Did a little bit of writing and a lot of editing, and were sort of my book mentors, which I appreciate very much. I just wanted to say that.
Well, thank you. I unmuted them both. They are very special people to the Veterans Breakfast Club. They guided me last year, General. We spent a lot of time on the air war over Europe.
Oh, yeah.
Because of the Masters of the Air program.
Yeah.
And both of these beautiful people educated me dramatically. You know, you think you know a little bit about World War II until you run into people like Marilyn and Colin. So
yeah. Can I, right before the break, we were talking about famous people.
Yeah.
Let me just mention a couple others. That in our Cambridge cemetery, we have on the walls of the missing Joe Kennedy.
Yes, I was there and I saw that just a few months ago.
Who was the senior Kennedy, and his father had aspirations that he'd be president. His aircraft went down on a secret mission there in 1944. And we also have Glenn Miller, the great band leader.
Yeah,
is on the walls of the missing at Cambridge Cemetery.
Yeah,
and we also have the entire crew of the USS Reuben James. That was the first American warship lost in the Battle of the Atlantic.
Yeah, you know, we were there when we went to England last year with the Veterans Breakfast Club group, and a moving cemetery. It just
no, it is. And I think most of you might be familiar with the poet Joyce Kilmer. He was with the New York Fighting 69th and refused a commission, wanted to go in as a sergeant. And of course, he wrote the poem Trees, I Hope That I Shall Never See, a poem as lovely as a tree. He's buried in Wazane. And we mentioned the 5 Sullivan brothers are on the walls of the missing in Manila. And for everybody's interest, you probably covered this, but it's 234,000 that we have buried and on the walls of the missing in our ABMC cemeteries. 180 of them are women.
And we're going to cover a couple of women here coming up, General. Thank you for that.
Okay.
So a few more of these stories from Rich's book. Charles Summers. Rich?
Charles Summers, a graduate of Berkeley, was the first casualty, first killed in action in Europe in World War II. He's buried at Netherlands American Cemetery. He actually went ahead with the British Royal Air Force to serve as a radar operator on a 5-man crew, learning radar operations, hopefully to bring back some learning and some cross-training with the Americans. He was killed in 1943. His plane, 1942. His plane was flying a 5-man crew sortie mission over the North Sea. It was hit by flak. There was documented that the plane landed at sea, and there were individuals, all the individuals, the four Brits and Summers were standing on the wing when it was overflown, but a rescue mission was never able to reach them in time. His body washed up several weeks later on the shores there in the Netherlands, and he is the first casualty, and he's buried at Netherlands American Cemetery.
One does not survive long in the North Sea.
No.
Yeah.
Wilma Vincent, she went by Dolly. This is one of my favorite stories in the book. I mean, they all deserve to be told, and like I said, it's always amazing to see courage out of all these individuals in whatever way they could help the mission. But her father was a doctor, her mother was a nurse. She was joined up with the nurse reserve unit was an aviator with the flight as a flight nurse. Started in 42, spent 3 years in theater in Europe. She's also buried in Netherlands. Finished her 30 sorties and was packed up and ready to go home. That's her second from the right there, Dolly Vincent or Wilma Vincent from San Benito, Texas. So she was done with her sorties, getting papers ready to go home in early 1945. She had just recently been married to an Army Air Force major in January, celebrated her 28th birthday in February. And one of her girlfriends was invited by another officer to a party, and she said, I'll take your sortie," and requested to replace Dolores Reiki on her sortie, which was begrudgingly granted. And of course, the plane went down over Germany. Not certain what happened, but her plane went down over Germany with loss of all souls on board. And several years later, I think it was in the 1990s, Dolores Reiki went to the cemetery, from what I understand, to visit. But she's laid to rest in Netherlands American Cemetery. Hospital was operated for a couple decades in Texas, named after her, subsequently closed in the early 2000s. Wilma Vincent was 28 years old.
Wow. What a heartbreaking. And I guess that's the point of all of these stories. That every single one of them, hundreds of thousands of them, are heartbreaking to somebody.
Yeah.
But somebody. Yeah.
Yeah.
Every headstone has a story.
It does.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I'm going to stop before we get to the last set because it's 8:17, just to check on questions or comments from our audience before we get to the last stories that you have, Rich. Okay. Anybody like to make a comment or ask a question? Yes, Marilyn.
Yes, two things, two ceremonies that I haven't heard talked about in the cemeteries, and I'm sure the general was certainly aware of the one with the rosettes, when a name on the missing walls, if that person is found, there's a ceremony at those cemeteries where they put a rosette next to the name that person's been found.
Yeah.
I'm sure you don't, the general's probably seen some of those. There's not a lot, but we had it with our Lieutenant Sconiers when we found him. And someone sent that from the cemetery in Belgium, the ceremony, the video of that. Mm-hmm. And the other thing I was going to mention is that in Luxembourg, a friend of mine was the ambassador of Luxembourg years ago, and he told me about the ceremony that they have there, where when they play taps, they have two buglers. One is out where the markers are. The other one is hidden in the woods. And so they play it in a dual way where one echoes the other. The first one plays the first few notes, and then you hear the distant bugler in the woods. And he said it's just one of the most haunting things that you could hear. It's a beautiful ceremony. So, yeah. And just one other thing, for those who don't know, and they're trying to find where someone has been buried, a relative, at the National Archive in St. Louis, you can request what's called an IDPF. It's an individual deceased personnel file. I had one from my father's, the one man that died when they were shot down. And when graves registration went in and they brought the bodies home, or they found them there and took them to one of the cemeteries there, They created these IDPFs, and they are just full of information. And I was able to find in mine that I had a map of where the man on my dad's crew was buried. And I sent it to my German friends. They immediately knew right where that cemetery was, at a little church. And I was able to go over and stand at the grave where he was. He's actually at the one in the Netherlands. They moved him. He's one that wasn't brought home. So they're easy to get. They're free. You just have to request them and send as much information about the person that you know. And all the letters between the families back and forth are there, trying to make the decision whether they're going to bring the person home or not. But if anybody has a question about it, just shoot me an email and I can tell you more.
Yeah,
Thank
just 2 or 3 weeks ago, Marilyn helped me through this IDPF, which I had never heard of, Marilyn. She
Yeah.
helped me finally locate a neighbor of ours when I was like a 4-year-old boy in East Lansdowne, Pennsylvania. He lived across the street, and his airplane went down, and I never knew whatever happened to him, etc. So I asked Marilyn about it. His name was Lieutenant Spidell, and she helped me find exactly where he's buried, when he was buried, etc. Very helpful, man. Thank you.
I was glad to do it, General.
Yeah.
I see Bob has his hand up. Do I have that right, Bob?
Yep.
Did you want to ask a
Bob,
question?
Yes, I just wondered, was Teddy Roosevelt's son, the aviator, ever repatriated, or is he buried overseas?
He's buried side by side with Teddy Roosevelt, his brother, Teddy Roosevelt Jr. So Quentin Roosevelt, who was killed in World War I, was reinterred next to Teddy Roosevelt Jr., and they lie side by side at Normandy. Teddy Roosevelt, of course, the most senior officer to land at Utah Beach on D-Day, and Omar Bradley was quoted as saying, "What's the most courageous thing you've ever seen?" He said, Teddy Roosevelt crisscrossing the Utah beach on D-Day, armed with maybe a handgun, encouraging the troops to get up and move forward. Roosevelt received the Medal of Honor for his work, and Quentin, his brother who died in World War I, was buried next to him at Normandy.
Yeah.
Teddy Roosevelt was, I think, 54, right? You can imagine a 54-year-old landing on a beach with a bunch of, 18 and 20-odd-year-old men. And he was suffering. And I'm a big Teddy Roosevelt fan, so a fan of his son too. He was suffering from heart disease already at that time.
Yes.
In the movie The Longest Day, they portray him as suffering from arthritis in the knee, which he had as well. He was terribly wounded in World War I.
Yes.
And he died of a heart attack in July, I think it was.
Yeah. That's right.
I saw a picture of the Germans. Did they give him a formal burial before he got taken?
Quentin. Yes.
Quentin, you tell the story, Rich.
No, go, please, Glenn, go ahead.
Yeah, he was shot down. Quentin was shot down behind, German lines. The Germans, was a much different air war in World War I than in World War II. The Germans knew who he was, and they gave him a formal burial. I don't know, Rich, is there more to it?
No, the eyewitnesses accounts in letters home said from POW said there was a full military funeral with officers in attendance, and yeah, you actually can see pictures of his temporary grave anyway if you do research on it online. But but Teddy Roosevelt and his father, along with the MacArthurs, are the only father-son pairings to have been awarded the Medal of Honors. But Quentin, it depends on who you ask, but statistics that I read said that it's about 3 weeks was the average life expectancy of a World War I American aviator, was about 3 weeks, most dying not even in combat, but just in training accidents with unstable aircraft.
Guys were flying kites with motors on them.
Yeah.
Okay, unless there's anything else, let's get to these last 3 stories.
Okay.
And we do have to go through these kind of quick.
Yes, sir.
But we want to honor a service of the military that doesn't get its due. And we have several members of the Veterans Breakfast Club who served in the Coast Guard. And we want to make sure we get to these.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll preface it. I know we want to go quickly, but the general talked about Cambridge. At Brookwood, the World War One cemetery in England, south of London, the walls are missing are the members of the Coast Guard who were part of the USS Tampa that went down, pardon me, in escort service off of England. And with that one sinking of the USS Tampa, the Coast Guard lost a higher percentage of force total than any other service. Just with the loss of the Tampa, they lost the Seneca, they lost other ships as well. But great respect for the Coast Guard. The USS Menges, where Boyce Nichols, Joseph Hooduk, and Lieutenant Grout served aboard, was commissioned and sent over into North Africa off of the coast of Algeria, conducting combat operations, anti-submarine operations. The USS Menges was a destroyer. It was recommissioned as a destroyer. It was hit by a torpedo with the back third of the ship sheared off, essentially. 31 men died, 25 were injured. She limped back into port into Algeria, where they offloaded the dead, which included Nichols, Hudak, who was a fireman, and Lieutenant Grout, a Princeton graduate. And the ship was towed back to the U.S., stitched together with another destroyer, and sent back to combat later that year. There you see Grout in that black and white photo, a Princeton graduate. And that brings us, I guess, to the end. If you're flipping ahead, Glenn, I'm trying to keep up with your.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
I'm going a little faster than maybe I should, but
Yeah.
We just like to respect the time frame. But
Yes.
glad you included ththese three Coast Guard men, because again,
Yeah.
they're a branch of military that is underappreciated. At least its role in World War II.
Well, yeah, and I had the great fortune when I first started out working at JTF-4 in Key West, Florida, Joint Task Force, and a lot of coasties there. I just have just so much respect for the operational tempo and the skill level of all the Coast Guard guys. I can't say enough about that organization. So yeah, I was happy to include them on a sad occasion for sure.
And then this last photo from Rich's book. What cemetery is this, Rich?
This is Florence American Cemetery, where Hall's remains. You can see the headstones. You can see the Star of David as well as the crosses. I love this image because it's how you feel sometimes, in that the headstones seem to go on and on and on, right? The loss just seems to be immeasurable, right? That's kind of the feeling, immeasurable, of the loss, whether it's the immeasurable emotion of losing a son or two sons, or three or five sons in the case of the Sullivan brothers, or a daughter in war, or the immeasurable feeling that you have when you walk out of Normandy and you've walked deep into Normandy, and then you have to walk past row after row after row after row, and that's just one plot. And then you go and you just realize the magnitude of the loss. And that's just, as Glenn mentioned, that's just a fraction. Those are the ones that are interred overseas, let alone the ones that are have touched American soil. But the story here in this book is really about those who have never had the opportunity and called away in war to come back home. And to me, that was very emotional for me and something that I wanted to document in my book.
Oh, you did it very successfully, Rich. It's really an excellent book. Recommend everybody run out and get a copy. It's emotional, for those of us who think this way, who, those of you veterans who fought the hard fight and put your life at risk. I've told the audience in other stories before. Anytime I go to a cemetery, you look for the notable men that were interred there, but I always look for a name that I've never heard of before, Private Joe so and so, and I have pictures of 4 or 5 of them, and I come back and I do some research on them, and some of the stories are just heartbreaking. The one I found in the Cambridge American Cemetery, I can't remember the name right now, was an Italian surname. Turned out he had been orphaned in the teens. I'm sorry, in the 20s. Grew up in an orphanage. Worked a bit, drafted, made it to Omaha Beach on June 6th and died right there in Omaha Beach. Nobody claimed his body. Nobody, no family, nothing. Yet he's just as important a man as any of these other names that we know so well.
Absolutely right. It is. That's an extraordinary story, and one that I wish I knew the story before I went, because I would go and have added them to the book. But no, it's been great speaking with you about this, and there are so many stories. The hardest, people will ask me, what's the hardest thing about the book? And it's stopping the biographies, right? Because there's I don't know, another 100 biographies that I wanted to, 80, 100 biographies I wanted to include, but time goes on and you've got to, and I try to get a representative sample, some women, some nurses, some women who didn't serve as nurses, some chaplains, some folks in non-combat roles, some OSS, some ambulance drivers. And of course we have the war fighters, a bunch of Medal of Honor recipients, a bunch of infantrymen and bombardiers and navigators and the like, and artillerymen. But the hardest thing was really stopping, because they all deserve to be remembered.
Yeah.
No.
Okay, well, we've reached the witching hour, but we'd be happy to allow the audience to ask any last questions of our guests, or any comments, anything you like. Any takers?
Rick, I'll ask you to unmute. I saw your hand. You want to unmute?
I have a question, and I know you talked about it. I was curious of what was the number one reason why most people left their loved ones over in either Europe and or some of these other places. Now, I read something, when I saw something where it said, I know for a fact I lost a fraternity brother, was found 48 years later, and it was the biggest excitement. The whole people grabbed because he was coming home after 48 years.
Yeah.
I was just curious why people would, not bring them back. You said 60% came back, 40% stayed. So what was the real main reason why most of them stayed?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if that's been collected. Maybe the general knows. Certainly in the book that we talked about earlier about bringing my boy home, it doesn't have a lead reason. There was certainly a stipend that was set aside, and oftentimes that stipend was exceeded if you just wrote a letter for allowance to being brought home and being reinterred in the U.S. There are a variety of reasons. I don't know that I have the answer about what the overarching opinion was. That we have a Native American, once he's buried, he was a Navajo, his dad said once he's in the ground, he's in the ground, leave him there. There was a Medal of Honor recipient who they wanted to bring him home, and his family said leave him with his mates, and they changed their mind. But I don't know, maybe the general knows, or maybe Glenn knows. I don't know, sir.
Yeah, no, Rich, I really can't add much to that either, other than each family made the decision. I mean, each family had a reason. And you're right, it was 60-40 in both wars. 60% elected to bring them home. And of course, the U.S. government paid for the bringing the remains home. But I can't pinpoint any single reason why they came home or why some left them there. Each family had made that decision. I'll tell you, as the Secretary of American Battle Monuments Commission, as you can imagine, those 3.5 years, I did meet with a lot of the next of kin of these soldiers and sailors, airmen, Marines who came over there to put flowers on the graves or participate in ceremonies, etc., and listen to their stories, etc.
My father, First Lieutenant Lauren E. Hance, is buried in the Florence American Cemetery. My mother never remarried. She said that she and two of my father's brothers who also served made the decision that he should be buried with his comrades in arms. They wanted him to be buried where he had fallen. Yeah. And that was always a point of it continues to be great pride in our family. So that was one family story.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I heard that story a couple times with families. Yeah. When you heard it from the grandkids and so forth, they recalled what their grandparents were saying. One wanted them to bring them home. The other said, no, let them stay there where they fell with their soldiers. Yeah.
My father's roommates in England were all buried in Normandy. and their plane was blown out of the sky. He was actually supposed to be on that mission, but it's a long story, but that was the thinking then, that they went down together and they would all remain. And I found their graves when I was there on the 75th anniversary and went to each one and thanked each one for their sacrifice, because my dad's crew was supposed to take that mission and it changed at the last minute. So it haunted him for years.
Wow. I see David has his hand up. David?
Yeah, I'm glad Marilyn was on. I just wanted her to ask her the name of that form or you mentioned for getting information on graves.
It's the acronym is just IDPF. It's Individual Deceased Personnel File. And recently they've all been moved to National Archive in St. Louis. And you would just request it with information. Glenn has my email address if you need it for any reason. I'd be glad.
Yeah, I promised one of our 90-some-year-old patients that I would help her find information on her brother who was killed in Germany as an infantryman in World War II. So I can have scan information, but I'll give him a shout out, see what I can do.
Good luck with
Thank
it.
you.
I hope you find him. Yeah.
And if you know they're buried in in an ABMC cemetery, an overseas cemetery, of course the IDPF will tell you that. But if it's, you can also just do a search at the ABMC website if you know that they're buried overseas, and you can find their plot and row and where they're located. There's an outstanding search function on the website, which the general can tell you more about. But
ABMC is I joined late. I apologize.
The American Battle Monuments Commission, General Matz was the head of it. The American Battle Monuments Commission manages and maintains 26 overseas cemeteries, of which 23 relate to World War I and World War II, and the 31 monuments on 17 countries. So abmc.gov, and you can download every name, or you can just do a quick search and put in, if you know their last name or their first name, you can put it in and it'll pull all of the Johnsons up in the different locations, and you can find, and actually the ABMC has done a great job also. Sometimes there's photos associated with it or documents associated behind that. But if you know they're buried overseas, you can shortcut that by going to abmc.gov.
Great, thank you.
We got one more question from Mary, but I'm going to preempt Mary. Sorry, Mary, because I can't read. I've thought about the question 2 or 3 times, and I keep forgetting it. South Korea, the Korean War. There's an American military cemetery in Seoul. I've been there. Aren't there American soldiers of the Korean War buried there?
Well, so we're going to. We have one of our battle monuments is down in Busan.
Yeah,
but that's just a monument. We do not have any cemeteries over there that I'm aware of. Well, there's no ABMC cemetery.
So all Korean vets were all Korean killed in action, or were brought back to the States or Hawaii, I would guess.
We're brought back to the States, I guess. Yeah, I mean, we have no American cemetery over there.
It was 52 or 1952 or 54, I think. Vice Admiral Crowder put that in the book in the forward. Vice Admiral Crowder was the head of the 7th Fleet for the U.S. Navy, and wrote the forward to my book. And he had mentioned, I think it's 52 or 54, I think, everyone came home after that.
Yeah.
Spent 2 weeks in South Korea. Boy, you want to go someplace fascinating and someplace where they love Americans? It's South Korea. They love Americans.
Yeah.
Good reason.
Yeah, no, you're right.
Mary, would you like to ask the final question of the night?
It was now it's 2 things. One, for somebody who doesn't want to try and fill out that paperwork, maybe do that as a last resort. Try just findagrave.com. I just did it for Henry Bossier, the first person you talked about. He came right up. So findagrave.com. You can find anybody on there. It's an amazing website. The other thing is, I didn't know about the Korean War either, and I just looked it up. And on the ABMC website, there is a cemetery, but it's for all the allies, our allies, and we only have 36 of our guys still there.
Yeah, I think you're right. Exactly.
Yeah, in Busan.
Right.
Yeah. I didn't think there was one there either, and so I just Googled real quick. But anyway, findagrave.com. Easy, lemon squeezy.
Yeah, you know, one other thing in the Honolulu Memorial that ABMC oversees in Oahu, we built 2 separate pavilions to that in recent years, one for the Vietnam War and one for the Korean War. So the American troops that are missing from the Korean War are on the walls of the missing in that pavilion. And the same as the Vietnam War are on the walls of the missing. But there's nobody buried or interred there.
Okay, well, look, we've gone over, and that's fine, as long as we're all interested and still asking great questions, which you have been. Sean, is there anything else to address before we sign off?
I think we're good. We appreciate everybody spending the time with us. And General, thank you for on the last minute coming on with us to talk about this. And Rich Sherman, thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, thank you. Rich, I'm going to get that book.
All you need to do is send me your address, sir, and I will send you a complimentary copy. It would be a privilege, sir.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Rich and General, thank you very much. Ed Cottrell, if you're still on, thank you. Thanks to all our members, Colin, Marilyn. See you next week.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.